Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of my video memoir. In this episode I want to talk about photography and its role in my life. And I owe my first induction into the world of photography to my uncle Gary. And Gary is an enormously talented photographer, and like the other two wizards, the three wizards are my dad and his two brothers. He was so generous in sharing this magical world that he lived and worked in. And my earliest memory of photography is of Gary coming to our house and shooting a photo in our living room, a space that I knew, of course, intimately because I spent hours there every day. And the scene was something like it was my brother and I playing in boxes that had gifts in them, and we're more interested in the boxes than the gifts. So this domestic scene. And what was incredible about it for me was, first of all, just witnessing the wonder of the making of the image. I remember gear, I remember a light stand, I think. I don't remember the camera, but I remember just the idea of gear, the aspect of technology. And then at the other end of the process, this image was produced that was so utterly transformed, and it utterly transformed the space that I knew so intimately into something that was different. It was alien, it was more beautiful, and it was that alienating effect of seeing something that I knew so intimately, but in a completely different way. That was this initial sense of wonder that has never left me in my exploration of photography. And that idea, or that experience of both the wonder and the alienation, the idea that in order to do this you need esoteric knowledge, you have to learn how to be an alchemist, that is part of photography. It is a technological endeavor. It's a product of the Industrial Revolution. It starts coming into being in the 1830s, right at the height of the Industrial Revolution. And the aim of it is industrial in nature. It is the early pioneers in photographic technique were using camera obscura, these boxes that had an opening or a lens on one end of it that projected an image of the world onto a sheet of glass that you could lay a piece of paper on, tracing paper, and trace your composition. And so this was a big thing in the period, and many amateurs were using this to make drawings. But people were using the camera obscura and wanting desperately to capture that image that is fleeting. It's hard to do. You have to be a really talented artist to trace an image like that and produce a good picture. And so you can read about this, and the early impulse is, how do I arrest this image? How do I freeze light, right? And the aim is to accelerate image production and to reduce the amount of human labor required to produce an image. That's the kind of demands of the Industrial Revolution. So the spirit of photography is technological and scientific, kind of in its origins and in its foundations. But what makes it a great artistic medium is precisely that. Its scientific, industrial, technological nature, that it is alien to us. It's a mechanical process. And the way that it links to wonder for me, and ultimately nature, and this kind of almost worship of nature that is, I think, the spirit underlying my work now, to sort of bear witness to the sublime of the world, of the natural world. Photography is an interesting way to do that because in a way it is anchored in the natural world in a way that we aren't as humans. It is a machine designed to capture a physical trace of the world through the pattern of light that is, that falls on the film or the image sensor. And that kind of quasi-scientific empirical sort of thrust that drives all of that, is what makes it wondrous and strange. In a way, its strangeness, at least my perception of it in my life now, after many years of kind of playing around with it, is that its alienness, its technological alienation, is what makes it such a wonderful tool for exploring the natural world. Now, in my case, I had the enormous fortune of being shaped by the world of photography, the different worlds of photography, just through random dumb luck, chance. Some of my earliest jobs were working retail in camera stores, selling camera gear. I worked in a 1-hour photo lab, processing film and printing photos. So I learned that side of commercial industrial photographic image production. I ended up getting a job in a industrial photo factory. Basically, it was like the sort of place where the Sears catalog was shot, a whole self-contained complex that had a product and fashion photography studios. And I worked in the in-house film lab there, where photographers would come and bring their film to me, and I would receive it and process it. It was a fascinating job because I got to know photographers and hang out in their studios and sort of understand what their lives were like and how they used technique and technology. Meanwhile, I was doing this job where I had to learn how to move in the dark. It was a giant industrial darkroom. So what you did is you received the film from the photographer and you loaded it up. You had to go into the darkroom through a revolving door, pitch black room, maybe about 20 by 30 feet, with a giant industrial film processor in it. And you had to learn how to go in there with the film in your hands and in pitch black unpack the film from its container, load it up into a frame and put it into the machine, and then come back out. And that took some doing, that took some learning, including dealing with the fear of the dark. But that the experience of actually walking inside the camera obscura and working in that pitch black, which is the world of the photographic process, those hidden processes, right? Was a kind of way of almost walking into the machine. Beyond that, I was learning about gear, again, through random luck, through my jobs. I worked in high-end camera stores in Toronto and Edmonton, which serviced industry, which meant that I could spend my time just playing with gear at all levels, from the cheap consumer stuff all the way to the stuff the pros use. I was a terrible employee. Instead of going out and making sales, I just sat in the back and played with the latest Nikon gear or whatever it was. All of it. And they serviced video and film too, so I learned that gear and talked to those people. And in all of that, I was never a good photographer, and I never called myself a photographer. I never considered myself to be a photographer. I have never called myself a photographer. I have incorporated photography into my artistic practice in the days when I was calling myself an artist. I call myself an amateur now to avoid the kind of restrictions of all those labels. But I was never a good photographer. I was passionate about it. I knew it intimately. I knew I had some sense of photographic history of photographers I loved, and and I had a technical understanding based on, of course, reading Ansel Adams, learning. In addition to the jobs, was a hobbyist, so I learned how to, use a darkroom, a hobbyist darkroom, black and white film processing and printing, and did all that. But I was bad at it. My friends all had talent that I didn't have. I seemed to lack natural talent. I picture an image, or I'd see something that inspired me by a photographer I loved, and just could never achieve it. And it's only, I'm 51 now, it's only since about 2020 that I think I finally built up my skills and understanding of the technique, of the process, of the technique, of the medium, that I'm starting to be able to produce images that satisfy me. And the reason I'm talking about that is because that, for me, in my personal experience, is bound up with the nature of photography. It's difficult. It's difficult and alienating. And that's what makes it so wonderful. And that's why it's such a powerful tool to sort of show you things about the natural world, because it's a mechanical instrument. And in a funny way, it doesn't care about our human detachment from and aesthetic appreciation of the world, all of our fancy, highfalutin thought. Photography is indifferent. It's interesting to read about the early reactions to like the daguerreotype, which is really what helped to popularize photography and make it accessible. you could get your portrait made. Suddenly millions of people were getting their portrait photographically made. What a moment. Imagine it. I mean, we have a sense of it now with our radical media, environment, but imagine it. Like, suddenly photographs are everywhere that didn't exist before. Suddenly everyone can have their portrait made, or at least those daguerreotypes were designed to be inexpensive and relatively accessible, even though they were inaccessible to many, to people who couldn't afford them. But anyway, the point is that in this moment there is this radical shock to the public collective consciousness of images, with photography coming in and utterly changing the nature of the image and what the image could do. It must have been traumatic and thrilling at the same time. So the early reaction to photography that in response to all of those things is, I'm trying to avoid the word development. It's hard to not make these puns unintentionally. Is that people were faced with images whose nature that was new to them. And one thing people said, early responses to the daguerreotype, is it applies the same attention to everywhere in the image. Every square centimeter has been rendered with the exact same degree of information density and so forth. So it's a profoundly inhuman sort of image. Humans don't make images that way. We kind of focus on, the face rather than the background. That's how our eyes and our minds work. And so that's painters respond to that. There tends to be more attention given to the face and this kind of thing. We're selective in our attention. That's how we work. Photography isn't. It has this kind of serene indifference that I relate to the sublime of nature. The more indifferent and inaccessible nature is, the more, here I'll sound like a complete lunatic, because I am one, unapologetically. The more difficult it is to access the truth of nature, the deeper the truth of nature. In my opinion, in my experience, that has been the case. And so it's the difficulty, the alchemical wonder of photography that Gary first showed me in this early formative moment in my life that's never left me, and that has profoundly shaped my understanding of my artistic kind of project in life, but also my relationship to the natural world. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there, because if I keep going, it'll just get longer and tedious. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. This is such an experiment for me. It's hard. This is my 5th take, not because I can't get the words right, but because I can't get the technique right. Last night I tried to record this I didn't have my camera with me. I was walking. I had my field recorder, and the audio is not usable because of wind noise. This morning, I kept pressing the pause button on my phone while I was recording, and then I was covering up the mic, and so I hope this works. So the larger point is, this is an experiment for me, and I don't know if it's watchable. I hope it is, but I'm grateful to you for sort of bearing with me. Love you all. Talk to you soon.